Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Logan Corbett. Corbett is the assistant coach at Champion Living Fitness. He competed for 5 years on a PRCA Permit. While in college, he never really found a groove in fitness. He began coaching the Rodeo Team at New Mexico State University and decided to try again. This time making strength training a higher priority, he found a lack of information for the sport. Coach Corbett enrolled through the National Academy of Sports Medicine and Certified Personal Trainer course. While completing his course, he began working for head coach Doug Champion at Champion Living. Coach Corbett is a certified CPT and has a CSCS. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Hey, thanks, Coach. Man, it is I have been literally counting down the days since we kind of got together and decided to do this. I've been so excited about it, and I feel honored. I obviously, until you reached out, I had never listened to your podcast before, and so this week I've gone down the rabbit hole, man, and it has been. I have learned so much in just a week of listening to your podcast. So I'm honored to be here and so excited for conversations that are to come today.
Yeah, I know this house has been tired of me talking about this. So it's rodeo is a passion of mine. I love it. For the coaches out there that normally listen, don't tune out. Give this a chance. It may not go. It may not go the direction you have in your mind. So hang with us on this one and see how it shakes out, because I know a lot of those guys out there have rodeo athletes and they don't know how to help them. And those guys are asking questions. Well, they don't understand some of the parts of the sport that could help, and they're looking at it from a different lens than maybe what they should.
Yeah, none of us know, like at this point with the limited research and data that we have, we're really, we're failing forward, and one of the things that I've taken from my CSCS studies and stuff over the last couple of years is that you're never right. You're just less wrong. And I've tried to take that approach to all my programming and exercise selection. And as I move forward, like, okay, I think we're getting close. Until we have more research and data, we're really, it's all theory,
Them academies look incredibly awesome.
They're a lot of fun. They're kind of like, I've always had this, and almost all of our coaches have always had this dream of, we love coaching, we love rodeo, of putting on some sort of next generation of rodeo school, where it's not like, okay, here's a couple hours of fundamentals and now let's get on Colts. Like, man, what like, we're missing something here. We're injuring more athletes than we're helping. And so we've just always had this, this dream. I just didn't know how to make it work. And then I started working for Champion Living Fitness in 2020, and we started kind of talking about the idea of putting on this Optimal Performance Academy. And it's grown. We just do 2 a year. With this year, 2024 is brand new. We're doing our first bull riding one, and then we'll do one bucking horse riding one, and we'd like to expand the other events. But it's really comprehensive because we're able to focus on the fitness aspect. We go over strength and conditioning for rodeo athletes, give them an idea of why training all year is important, not just when you have time or when it's convenient. What that should look like, like appropriate training. And then we go over some general nutrition information that most people don't know, budgeting, the strategy behind entering rodeos to win money. A lot of guys buy their permit and they're off to Denver and San Antonio, and you're going to get pounded there. Like, you're just going to donate money. Here's how we enter to make money. And then, of course, we have all the stuff that regular rodeo schools have, where we do fundamentals. We just do them for 2 full days. We don't load anything until the 3rd and 4th day. They have to be flawless on the spur board and on the bucket machines before we load a horse. And they're really cool. This is the last thing I'll say about it. They're really cool because at most clinics, you have those aha moments, maybe 2 or 3 over the weekend. You got 30 guys, a lot of green, but you get like 2 or 3, like, you see the light bulb go off for them while they're on the back of something. We get those every 15 minutes. because we take these elite guys that are already riding pretty good and we just tweak one thing. and we made them do the drills for 2 days before. And so like every other horse we buck, it's like they come back and they're like, did you see that? I can't believe I did that. I was like, dude, told you. Like, so anyway, it's really, they're so cool. They're such a unique thing, and they're a lot of fun to be a part of.
They're very similar to what the NFL does for their rookies. Bring them in, manage money. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have to deal with all the things that come with being on the road. You got to, you got to overcome so much just to do what you love. But if you don't know how to do that, you're in a huge hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's where we want to see rodeo go. I mean, you too, right? Like that's the direction that we want to see rodeo go. Is I want to see it be more mainstream, and I want our athletes to be able to retire from rodeo and not have to go work a construction job or go coach a rodeo team. Not that there's anything wrong with those things. And if that's what you want to do, that's awesome. But so many of us, we get done rodeoing and we are as broke, if not more broke, a lot of times more broke physically and financially the day you retire or quit than you were when you started. It's like, man, and it's changing. The money's getting bigger in rodeo, all that kind of stuff. But man, we want to see some Tom Brady's in rodeo. I want to see guys winning consecutive gold buckles in their late 30s, early 40s, like in the rough stock events, especially. We already see that in a lot of the timed events, but the rough stock events, man, if we could extend somebody's career by 5 years, 8 years, and they can win an average of 250,000 a year, they're competitive. Maybe they're not winning the world, but they're in the top 5 for 5 more years. It's over $1 million we added in career earnings. And it's all because they knew how to go about professional rodeo from the very beginning, like the NFL does with those rookies. So I think that I'm hopeful that the culture is changing, and it just takes time.
So I live in nowhere, Missouri. We're on the Kansas line, South Kansas City, about an hour in the country. I grew up, around some rodeo cowboys. I rodeoed a little myself, not by no means awesome, but I grew to love the sport. I have a few rodeo guys in the gym, and that's how I found your stuff. I've got one over at Fort Scott Community College right now, and he's just riding incredible. He'd been asking me for workouts. I have an idea in my mind of what needs to happen, but then I found your page, and then so we can kind of bounce some ideas back and forth about what it takes to be a top hand.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot just in our discussions this week on your thoughts, and there were some things that you brought up that I had never even heard of, and so I've been like doing some research this week and trying to figure out. And I think that we both approach it from a different avenue. You obviously have a lot of time involved in strength and conditioning and working with all types of individuals. And I'm coming in as somebody that has never been involved in strength and conditioning up until just a few years ago. And I was always a contestant. So I'm coming at it from a contestant's point of view. And I think that is what makes this relationship, or really what makes Champion Living Fitness also like successful, is that so many of us were, highly competitive rodeo athletes at one point in time. So we went up and down the road. Quite a few of us tried to make the finals. We've got one coach, Caleb Bennett, who's a 10-time NFR qualifier in the bareback riding, and so we've all lived the lifestyle, and we kind of understand what the lifestyle looks like. And now I have that part, and now I'm putting the science behind the training and trying to figure out the most appropriate route. And I feel like a lot of other strength and conditioning coaches, they already have the science, and they understand so many of the foundational concepts of strength and conditioning, but they don't necessarily understand the demands of the sport. And so I am kind of like flip-flopped. And so anyway, it's cool.
It's very much like a sport coach merging with a strength and conditioning coach. There has to be a line in there somewhere where you can bounce ideas off of and see it from the other person's perspective to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And we do a lot of sport stuff, as a bareback rider. I help a lot of, I had a client here yesterday. He's passing through on his way over to your neck of the woods to Fort Scott for a bareback and saddle bronc riding school this weekend. He's a green bareback rider, but I mean, we we were on the spur board yesterday, and so I do a lot of sports stuff. But I really want to dive more into the strength and conditioning side of things and how I can best help my athletes. And I don't necessarily want to be known as somebody that is the bareback riding coach, as much as I do like, man, I want to be the strength and conditioning guy. I want to be one of the forefathers of strength and conditioning in the world of professional rodeo. And so anyway.
Now, I don't want to pigeonhole cowboys, cowgirls. I don't want to stereotype them, but the ones I've been around, and even when I was riding,
yeah.
are very sport specific.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't see how it carries over to the back of a horse, if they can't see how it carries over to a bull, well, it's obviously not going to help. And getting that stereotype broke down, that it's not necessarily more bulls you need. It's not more horses you need. It's more strength you need.
Man, that you're preaching now, man. I'm telling you, most rodeo athletes, you are correct in saying most rodeo athletes, they spend 99% of their time on the skill. They're working on their craft. They're riding the spur board. They're riding the bucking machine. They're just going and getting on practice bulls, those kind of things. And the skill is the largest part of it. Otherwise, anybody that's just dirty strong, we could take some D1 running back and go put him on a bucking horse and he just spur the dog out of it. That's not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? Because it is so much skill that requires that the sport takes. But with that being said, man, we've got to shift our focus and get these guys in the gym as well as their skill training. They've got to be stronger, and you're right. The face validity has to be there. And so the tough job for us as strength coaches is that I know what the athletes want and what they think they need. A lot of them wrestled in high school or played football, and they trained probably not super purposefully, but just really hard all the time. High intensity. And that's where they're coming from, and that's what they think that they need. And then I know on the other side, I know what they actually need. And we have to try to bridge that gap. We have to try to communicate things in a way. And I have to, when I'm starting with somebody, try to communicate very effectively. And then I have to compromise a little. I'm not going to run people through all kinds of AMRAPs and EMOMs and all this stuff that they think they need. But I do have to compromise a little so that I can show them the way. And then as I earn their trust and they start to feel better, and a lot of times they see their performance increase because they feel better, I earn more trust, and we shift the needle more and more and more. And then eventually, a year in, I've got a few guys. Cooper James is one. He's a young rookie bull rider, saddle bronc rider, and he's a high money winner at San Antonio right now, going into the short round. He's knocking it out. I've had him since he was 17, maybe 16, right before he turned 17. And I can write whatever I want to. And he's like, yeah, whatever you say. I mean, because I've earned his trust, and he's seen the improvement in the arena. And so we do have to get these rodeo athletes to understand that, that strength and power development is so important in their longevity, in their performance. It's a huge aspect of it that's missing right now.
Now, there's quite a bit in there that we could talk about, but I'll kind of go back to what you were talking about with wrestling.
Yeah.
While I would consider the rough stock events very, very similar to a combat sport, the training that they think they need is almost in the wrong direction. You don't need to be overly conditioned for 8 seconds. Now, you're going to get the absolute crap beat out of you. Don't get me wrong, but you're looking at that body system where it's explosive. You're in that 7-second window right there of where your anaerobic system is at the highest. That's the part that I'm wondering. Is that the part that gets the focus for you guys? Because, that's the part of the body that is really being used.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely do. I have to take in, again, it comes down to the individual needs of a client. I might get somebody that's completely untrained, and their just general aerobic capacity is trash. Well, okay, we've got to take some time and build some general aerobic capacity. And I'm not having them run miles, I'm going to build a baseline level of aerobic conditioning there, and then we can move into more sport specific stuff. And I like to think about it as every injury that I ever had. Yes, as you ride bucking horses or bulls, you ride for 8 seconds, and then you have to get off on the pickup man. Or in the bull riding, you've got to ride for 8 seconds, and then you've got to be able to safely navigate your way off of the bull and out of harm's way. Maybe it's up on the fence or out of the arena. And so I tend to think of our work period, it really is as like, it's about 20 seconds probably, right? Because it doesn't matter if they're how explosive and powerful they are for 8. If they lose all gas at 9 seconds, they're going to get crippled, because they still have to work and get off on the pickup man. You know what I'm saying? They still have to have the gas to be able to move and get out of the way of the bull. They have to be able to do that. So that's exactly where our focus is the energy systems that are involved. And that's what a lot of rodeo athletes don't understand, is that they think if it's hard, then it's beneficial. And so I should just run my legs off. And if I don't think I'm going to puke or pass out during a workout, it was not an effective workout. And the fact of the matter is that all they're doing when they're building up that big aerobic capacity, they're just wearing themselves out before they ever get to the rodeo. And then the injury that happens, sure, it looks like an acute injury that happened at the rodeo because you landed on your shoulder, or you landed on your hip, but it had really been on its way for months and months before because of overtraining. You were doing too much of the wrong stuff in the gym, and that was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Now I have some ideas on this, and we'll kind of head down this rabbit hole, but what you have to, I guess, if you're out there and you don't understand, what you have to understand about rodeo cowboys and cowgirls, they spend an enormous amount of time getting to where they're going. And then when they get there, they could have drove 4 hours, they could have drove 6 hours, they could have drove 8 hours. It just depends where the rodeo is, where they're leaving, what they're trying to do. And then when they get there, they're in a hotel. Maybe they have a Planet Fitness membership. Maybe they have time to go to the gym. Maybe they don't. Some guys, if they're down on their luck, they might be sleeping in somebody's horse trailer. You don't know what you got, but
Yep.
It's not going to be ideal conditions. So figuring out what works for somebody that doesn't have a gym.
That's tough. I mean, it is hard. So many guys are going in. A lot of guys are taking like Capri in bed truck campers now, or another variation of that, and or sprinter vans. And so they've got that set up, or even minivans. They've got their own space set up, which is really, for a rodeo athlete, ideal, because you can control so much of your sleep environment, which maybe we'll get into recovery and stuff at some point. But I say all that to say, if they've got their own rig that they're taking, they've got room for a duffel bag that can handle a 20-pound slam ball, maybe a 30-pound kettlebell, and a bunch of resistance bands. And with that kind of stuff, we can utilize, when they get to the rodeo, and they've got a couple hours, right? And they've been driving most of the night. They've got a couple hours there. A nap is in order. They can catch a little nap, and then they can get out in the grass there in the parking lot. And with that slam ball, we can do just a little, 20 minutes, maybe as much as 30 minutes of some some sort of active recovery with a little bit of power at the beginning of the workout. And it's amazing how much better they feel. So we don't necessarily, of course, it would be ideal for everybody to have a weight room that they could get in even in season. Number one, rodeo athletes don't think they need to train in season because they're getting on 6 or 7 bucking horses a day. Number two, even if they did believe it, the reality is they're not getting in the gym. And so we have so many mental hurdles to cross. So I have to make it as easy as possible for them to get something in when they're on the road full time. And that has to look like them having a little bit of auto regulation there, a little bit of control over how many sets they're doing based on how they feel. And I've started incorporating some of the perceived recovery status stuff in there, and letting them kind of auto regulate, sets. Obviously intensity stays high, but sets, and then moving into some mobility and some pump in 25 minutes, and trying to get them moving intentionally, is super important. And the warm up before they ride. I mean, all those kind of things, that intentional movement is going to dramatically play a difference in their performance, because these guys professional athletes are going to 80 to 100 rodeos a year. I mean, they'll get on 25 bucking horses in the month of July, maybe another 20 or 25 in August, 15 to 20 in September. I mean, they're doing it, so we've got to try to find ways to make it work.
I had in the back of my mind one of those little spud sleds, that's flat, that pulls a 45-pound plate, because I think you could do with where I'm going with this. Eventually I'll get there, but what I'm thinking you could do with that would be incredibly helpful, because you have so much variety in that, and what I have in the back of my mind. So I'll lay this out and we'll see what you think. But I look at the athletes and I cross compare them to a sport as far as body type. So let's take your bull rider. In my mind, I'm looking at a safety, a defensive back. You're looking at that body size, that quickness, that speed. You start getting into your saddle bronc riders. I'm thinking more about like a wide receiver. Maybe not that tall. We're not talking like, a 6'6" guy, but a lanky body with the long legs that can cover some ground. Your bareback, I'm thinking more like a linebacker, fullback type. They can have that body type because of the way they ride.
Yep.
Then your bulldoggers, you're getting into offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Calf ropers, I look at them like a tight end, like a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle, that style body type. So that carries over to what their sport demands are, what I think could help or could not. I mean, I'm down the sprinting rabbit hole and what it would do for the CNS of a rodeo cowboy. So if you've got a bull rider, he could charge that CNS through sprinting. It's not a ton of sprinting, but you need the acceleration. And then, what would really be great in the perfect world is to know the times like flying tens, so that you could see the development of absolute power, but then you could see the top end speed. So like a bull rider, on a flying 10, if you could get him down let's say 0.95 or whatever, where he's somewhere getting just over 20 miles an hour. Well, his body's in a position where CNS wise, speed wise, and absolute strength wise, he's pretty dang healthy to hop on the back of a bull. I don't know. That's a crazy way to look at that, but how do you see that?
Yeah, I think I don't disagree. I don't disagree with your analogy there in comparing. I think that you're probably right. And then we have to take it from there, and then we have to say, okay, what would a wide receiver look like if he had never trained a day in his life, and if he was not very athletic? You know what I'm saying? Because that's what rodeo athletes are. As far as body types, you're probably right, but these bull riders, a lot of them are 140 pounds, 135, 150 pounds. They're relatively untrained. Any training that they have done for the most part has been high intensity interval type training of some kind in a CrossFit gym, maybe, or, wrestling style training, a lot of circuits and whatnot. And so, they're not, they're just not equipped for. I find that I spend the majority of my time trying to establish some sort of baseline level of absolute strength with these guys before I can move into some of that stuff. I don't disagree with you at all. I think that sprinting would play a huge role. Their ability to triple extension, right? Our hips, like that's everything for all rodeo events, but especially when it's very easy to see the face value in bull riding and explosive hips, because that's the movement. They're just hinging at the hips. They're driving their torso up over the front end of the bull, and then they're extending their hips. They're setting their hips on their bull rope as that bull kicks. And so for them, it's very easy to see how having explosive hips would help them. And so that's, I mean, whether it's, trap bar jumps. I mean, there's so many different exercises that a guy can pick from that we can use to build the power and the explosion and developing that central nervous system. But I agree with you. I think sprinting is huge for these guys, and it's not something that they do enough.
Okay, you touched on it there, and I had a note on this, so we'll just get to it now. I also think back to some Chris Corfus stuff and sprinting and how much, a shin guard affects a guy's speed, right? So rodeo gets to be where you have to start thinking mass specific also. So if you've got a bull rider that's up over a bull, if he gets too big in the chest, well, now that's weight he has to manage at top speed. Saddle broncs really even more so because the lever is so long. While, you want a big barrel chest and you want to look good at the dance or wherever it is you're going, when you're on, you have to manage what you put on at very high speed. So now you have to be even stronger if you're built that way.
You're exactly right. And that's why most guys, most bull riders especially, want to stay as small as possible. There is a extremely talented bull rider out there, a multiple time world champion in the PBR. His name's Jess Lockwood, and he's an insanely talented bull rider. I mean, it came up at a young age, was really, really small. I'm going to say like 135 or 138 pounds. And over the last few years, he's suffered injury after injury after injury. And of course, we don't know for a fact, but I think, well, how much more resilient and durable would he be if instead of on his build, instead of being 135, if he was 155, right? At some point in time, yes, we don't want to get too heavy because then that's going to start throwing off the mechanics of riding a bull or riding a bucking horse. But we haven't, for most guys at 155 or 160 pounds, we haven't got to that point of diminishing returns yet. They're just going to be more explosive. They're going to be more powerful. They're going to perform better. They're going to last longer. They're going to be way more durable when they hit the ground by being stronger. But getting that into the brain of a 19-year-old bull rider is difficult to do because we're battling this cycle where the guys at the top, not a lot of them are training correctly, and a lot of them are smaller, right? So then these guys are looking at what they're doing and they say, well, in order for me to be like that, I need to do what they do. And so then the cycle just repeats itself. And it takes some of these young guys willing to step outside of the norm. And hopefully in a few years, we'll see these young guys like Cooper James just hit astronomical places within the world of professional rodeo early on, and we can start a new cycle. But right now we're just trying to break out of that, like, hey, I need to be as small as possible. I agree. There is 225, you're probably not gonna have a whole lot of luck riding bulls at 225. Far be it for me to say, but I would say that might be a spot in which we are so strong and powerful that we've lost some of the finesse that it takes to ride bulls at an elite level. But 135, I'm not convinced that that's where a guy needs to be, especially if he's 5'10", 5'11". Get out of here. We need to add a little bit of, add some meat on those bones and help guys be more explosive, more durable.
Yes, and with the size comes the strength. As much mass specific as you need to be.
Exactly.
But cruise up there a little bit. You'll feel better maybe with that size. If you ride better, give it a shot. Now you know where you need to be. I mean, I think obviously they ride enough that they'll be like, at 160, I don't feel good.
Yes.
At 153, I'm nails. At 135, I don't feel strong. You know?
Absolutely. And I have guys talk to me about that all the time. I mean, I've got guys that are like, hey, I'm 10 pounds heavier than I've ever been. Maybe we're in the winter. We've been working on adding some size and some strength. And they're like, I'm 10 pounds heavier than I've ever been. Like, is this something to be concerned about? And I was like, well, you're going to a practice pen next week. Like, let's go and just see how you feel. 9 times out of 10, you're like, man, I've never felt this good. Like I feel fantastic so you're right. There needs to be, there's not a perfect number for anybody as far as body weight's concerned. Everybody has to kind of figure out what works for them. But I would say that generally the consensus would be if they would add some size and strength, they would perform better and feel better.
I want to switch this up a little bit and we'll get back to the strength and conditioning, but me and you talked about this a little bit this week, and the further I'm into it, I wonder how much it would help the RPR for Cowboys. I don't know what your background is in that, but with hip flexors, hamstrings, glutes, all the things that activates and turns on, and you take the class, it's not much money, but if you save a guy a hamstring tear or you save a guy a hip flexor issue, how do you think that could play into that?
Well, I'll be completely transparent. My background with RPR is going on about 4 days long and about an hour and 15 minutes. I haven't even finished the Cal Dietz podcast that you recorded where you guys got into that. So that's my background on it. And right now, my mind is blown. I've even watched some, I guess that's not true. I have watched some YouTube videos this week, based on, you had said that you watched some YouTube videos and you were able to help an athlete. And I was like, okay, I'm getting on. So anyway, I watched a handful of 10 minutes maybe of YouTube videos. I don't know how I'm going to incorporate that yet. But that is something that is absolutely needed within the world of rodeo. This morning I was listening, and before our podcast, I was listening to the podcast you did with him where he talked about sprinting, I think it was a 20-yard sprint with like a water-filled, water bag or whatever with 5 pounds of water in it, and just how the body's working at stabilizing and turns everything on lower body wise. What? It makes so much sense to me. And I can't believe that I've never thought about it. And at this point, I'm still having guys go through like a little bit of a general warm up, a more dynamic warm up that's, following ramp protocol, increasing intensity as we go along, and then finishing with, a set, maybe a light set of whatever we're about to go do. But like, man, it makes a lot of sense. And so it's something that I want to continue to research and dive into. You're definitely going to be able to educate me on RPR and how it can affect rodeo athletes without a doubt, because I have very little experience at this point.
I think it would be crazy to show up to the NFR and see guys running goat drills in the back and then do an RPR.
Dude, 100% it would be. But I do think the time is coming. I do think that the time is coming. We've got to get coaches educated, right? And we're seeing more popularity in remote coaching in general across the board. But then within rodeo, we've got Champion Living Fitness. There's Wolf and Sons. There's Sean Reedy out of San Antonio. There's Acumen Performance in Canada. And then that's just like the ones that come to, there's more out there that are working a lot with these rodeo populations. So we've got to provide education to the coaches, continue to be educated ourselves. This is not I know and I'm going to teach others. We just have to grow together in education. And then the real challenge is going to be educating the rodeo population and getting them to buy in to this. Can increase your performance without a doubt. It can increase your longevity, can help you. And it's just so different than anything that they're used to up to this point. I mean, we've still got guys. You go to any rodeo near you, especially an amateur rodeo, and you're going to see a dude before he competes hanging a foot up on the fence and static stretching for 45 seconds to get his groins loosened up. Like, that's where we're at in rodeo. And I read, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. I want to stay on task, but just to illustrate that point, I was reading that the golden age of strength and conditioning was recommended to me, and I got it in. And so in that, I'm learning a little bit about the history of strength and conditioning within the world of football and a couple of the coaches' stories that are in there. And I think that rodeo is in a very similar place as football was in the 60s and the 70s, where it was like, we don't lift weights because that's going to make us slower. And slowly over time, one coach got his foot in the door, and the sport coach was like, listen, we'll give it a shot, but if you make my guys slower, you're fired. And the rest is history. Now these guys are training in season. They're lifting more weight. Performance is skyrocketed. But that's all the way back to the 60s and 70s. That's where rodeo is now. They don't want to lift weights because they're afraid that they're going to get too bulky and slow. They don't understand the nutritional aspect of getting bulky. They don't understand a lot of that stuff. They certainly don't understand the central nervous system adaptations that need to take place. And but yes, seeing guys do that kind of stuff at the NFR or at any rodeo for that matter it's the dream, man. It's the goal. It's where it's where I pray we're headed. And it's what I work every day for is moving rodeo in that general direction.
Your story there, I think that was Bob Devaney that told.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
He told Boyd Epley, yeah, I'll give you a shot, but you make my guys slower.
That's exactly right. I couldn't remember the name off the top of my head, and I didn't want to misquote it, but I was like, man, that book I've been reading, and it slaps me in the face. I'm like, oh, we have so much work to do, and I want to get around those guys. Like I want to be able to, like, the ones that are still around. Like, man, I want to ask them, how did you do it? How did you change the trajectory? How did you change the culture? I mean, I think that the answer is probably just putting one foot in front of the other and just continuing to educate yourself and working with more athletes. But that's what we want to do in rodeo, man. I don't want this to just be cowboys, like drink and love and fight. I don't ever want the cowboy way of life to leave rodeo. I love the Western heritage. And I mean, everybody's drawn to being a cowboy. Watch Yellowstone. I mean, what has that done for our rodeo community and for the Western way of life in general? But at some point in time, we have to start considering ourselves as professional athletes if we want to reach new heights as an industry. We've got to start treating ourselves that way.
Now, I want to come back to the high school level, but let me throw it out to the elite level. I wonder, like, you see Bomberito, you see Villani, you see these guys that are prepping guys for the combine, and their results show at the combine. I wonder if it's going to take a few cowboys going through a quote-unquote NFR prep and then show out at the NFR. And then even then, that's not going to happen in a year, obviously. But, hey, these guys keep having great NFRs. Why?
Why? Yeah.
Obviously they're a good rider. They wouldn't have made it to begin with.
Yep.
But what is peaking them at the time they need to be peaked when all these other cowboys are beat up? By the time they get to the NFR, they're shot. And now all of a sudden you come in, you're fresh. You've done all the restoration practices. You've ate good. You've worked out all year. And then you take that 2 months before NFR to lock in. And now you're running sprints and you're doing box squats and you're doing sumo pulls. And all of a sudden you show up to the NFR and you're a freaking beast. Maybe that helps. I don't know. That's just something I thought about all week.
I agree with you. And we're seeing that a little bit. I mean, we've had, personally, like I've worked with a saddle bronc rider by the name of Damian Brennan. And I've had the privilege of being able to work with him over the last few years. And he's an Australian athlete who came to me, I think the year before he bought his rookie card. And we started working together. And then I got to work with him all through his rookie year. I think I'm gonna botch it, but he finished in the top 20, barely missed making the NFR, maybe 22nd, somewhere right around in there, barely missed on his rookie card, ended up winning Rookie of the Year. And then this past year, he qualified to the Wrangler National Finals, and he hit some home runs out there. I mean, he won a couple rounds. He did, and actually from the last summer, so the NFR is in December. For those that maybe aren't familiar, the NFR it's our Super Bowl of rodeo. It's 10 days. They can win $30,000 a night. Each round pays $30,000. And then the average at the end, whoever does best on all 10 days wins an additional $80,000. So these is, like, for rodeo cowboys, it's life-changing money. And they qualify there through the regular season, which technically starts October 1st and ends September 30th. So we have a 12 months of regular season, and then at September 30th, the top 15 in the world are going to qualify for that Wrangler National Finals, which is 2 months later. And so Damian Brennan, has been with me. Well, he went back home to Australia to prep for the NFR, and we got after it. I wrote some NFR prep stuff. I built in a deload on his travel week when he was coming back to the States, and man, he did really, really well. And he's not the only story. We've had a lot of other high level athletes that have trained exceptionally well leading up to the NFR, and then they have stellar performances. And so it's, man, it's there's some correlation there. There's also so many variables in rodeo that are not the same as other sports. And, they don't get to pick the bucking horse or the bull that they get on. It's drawn for them. And some bulls are more desirable than other bulls, or some bucking horses are better than other. And so you can get there and you can have a really long 10 days. You can do all the things. You can train exactly how you should, never miss a day, take care of your nutrition, your hydration, your sleeping, 8-9 hours a night. You're doing all the things. And you get to Vegas, you feel the best you've ever felt. And you can draw, it's the NFR. All the horses are supposed to be great, but there's still a bottom end of the pen. You can still maybe not draw the animal that you need to be successful. And you can have a really long and hard 10 days. And you did all the things. So we battle some of that as well in the perception. Well, that guy, he worked with Champion Living. He trained his guts out. He only won 50,000 at the NFR. And this guy over here, he didn't do any training, and he showed up and he won 250,000. So people really draw conclusions because we're so short-sighted. We just see the here and now, but I'm in it for the long game. I want to see how Damian Brennan's doing in 10 years. That's where I think we'll start to see not just what happens outside of 1 year, like you said, but outside of 5 years, 10 years, the consistency that takes place as these guys are training, the consistency that starts to show itself in the arena, the lack of, it's a rodeo, man. You go sit out in the middle of the interstate, you can't be upset when you get run over by a semi. And it doesn't matter if you can back squat 2 times your body weight. You get hit by a semi, you're wrecked. We're getting on bulls. You're going to take a horn to the head and you're going to be done for a minute. It doesn't matter how well you're training. So there are a lot of those variables that come into play. But I think by and large, we're going to see a lot of these injuries that could have been prevented. They were overuse injuries that could have been prevented. We'll see some of those start to go away, at least to a degree, with the guys that have been consistently training. And then, like you're saying, the ball will be rolling. People will be like, oh, well, I haven't seen him have to take hardly any time off for injury in the last 5 years. What's he doing? And they start digging in a little bit and they're like, oh, he works with Steven, over at Voodoo Power, or he works with Logan and Champion Living. And maybe there's something to that.
Now, coming back down to the high school level, I talked to a lot of guys in Texas. A lot of them listen to the show, a lot of those coaches, and they don't necessarily know how to help their rodeo athletes, but they're starting to find that their rodeo athletes are asking the questions that they should be asking. And me and you talked about it a little bit this week, and I was talking to Coach Garner in Texas about Goat Tire, asking how many miles per hour she needed to set the truck to pull the goat to match what she was doing in school. Now, we can get into that in a minute because it's not as cut and dry as one would think. But at the lower levels, younger levels, not lower levels, but younger levels, you're starting to see a desire to figure this out because they see what it's doing for baseball. They see what it's doing for volleyball. And there are a lot of them anymore are multi-sport kids. Where back in the old days, you was a country kid and you might play football, you might wrestle, but you were going to rodeo. And that was, so you knew what you got. So as far as all of these coaches getting better, it's starting to rub off, but now they have to figure out how to help them.
Yeah.
And that could help change the culture maybe.
I completely agree. And as long as I don't want to step on any toes here, but I'm green, man. I have no problem admitting in the world of strength and conditioning, I'm green. I have no ego. I'm just doing the best I can learning, but I've found so far, and maybe I've just not looked in the right spots, but I found that strength and conditioning as a whole, it is a ego driven culture and environment. And so many guys, as a whole, we're so insecure because nobody really knows what they're doing. So nobody wants to share anything with anybody else because they're afraid that they'll be found out that they're a fraud. And it's like, hey, okay, why don't we all just collectively say, based on research, we think we know what we have going on, but that could change tomorrow. We don't really know. And we're just willing to help each other. And that's what I want for rodeo strength and conditioning. I it has nothing to do with my pocket and my bottom line and me getting clients and me being the best. And I just want rodeo to change. And if these guys that are working with, maybe they work with football players and they work with basketball players, and they've got a couple kids that are in high school there that also are pretty competitive rodeo athletes, and they want to help their rodeo athletes too. Like, let's figure it out. Let's work. If there's anything that I can do to help, I want to do that, because I just want to see the sport of rodeo elevated. And the way that we do that is by changing one athlete at a time, and it's going to take all those strength coaches all across the country of all backgrounds to be able to do that. And so I think it's awesome that those guys are wanting to help and asking the right questions and looking into, okay, how can we make our goat tires better? How can we make our young, bareback riders or saddle bronc riders or any event, how can we elevate their performance in the weight room? The fact that they're asking those questions, to me, is a sign that we're on the right track.
Now, you touched on it earlier about the hip hinge and how important the hips are in the roof stock events. I've recently been able to talk to Pete Bomarito and listen to some of his back dorsiflexion stuff, and starts getting deep into the foot and how the foot and the correctness of the foot dictates a lot of hip mobility. It seems to me like the application of that could definitely help, because you don't need a gym to do back dorsiflexion. You don't need things to strengthen your foot. And when you watch a lot of these cowboys walk by, you can look at their boots and you can tell what's going on in their feet. You know what I mean? And
That's exactly right.
A lot of these boots are rolled out the side. They're about ready to blow out the side of the boot. Obviously they're not on their big toe, or they wouldn't walk like that. Yeah. So I don't know. I think simple things like that could help, but where are you and Doug and some of these other guys out here trying to help? Where are you at on that type of ideology?
I think it's great. I think all of those things. I mean, and I haven't. Again, there's another concept that you brought up the other day that I'm not very well versed in. I think that all of those things can and will help rodeo athletes moving forward. But I think that we have to think about, what can we get? What do we know? What do we know, or are 99% sure is going to make an impact in a rodeo athlete's performance, right? And then based on that, how much of that can they buy into? Now, getting a goat tire to work specifically on her foot and this back dorsiflexion and whatnot, or getting her to just buy into the concept of resistance training, which one's going to be easier? Probably selling the face value of some resistance training, at least in my mind, right? So that's where I start. That's where I start. And I think everybody needs to know we need to know how to push. We need to know how to pull. We need to know how to squat. We need to know how to hinge. We have to focus on the fundamentals. And then as I learn and get better and grow as a coach, and as our athletes become more trusting and they want more and they become more growing, then we get to move into some of these other principles that we're pretty dang sure are going to increase performance. And so I'd say that would be where I would stand, is that I think all of those are very valid things that would impact an athlete's performance. But it just like having your CSCS, it doesn't matter to a rodeo athlete. A rodeo athlete doesn't know what that is. They don't care about a master's of science. They don't care about a CPT. It means nothing to them. It doesn't matter how perfect an exercise is, or the program is, or the periodization is. If they don't buy into it, none of it matters. I've done it before. I've wrote what I thought was the most perfect program. And I'm like, this right here, there are no perfect programs, but based on what I know and my experience, this is the best thing I've ever written. And I'm so excited about it. And I can't wait for athletes to get into it, and they go and they do 30% of it. And I'm like, okay, cool. We're not getting there. We're not. So what can they buy into? What can they be consistent with? And then progressing from there. Does that make sense?
Yes. And you hear it all the time. It's not selected to rodeo. It's multiple sports, and the culture coming through, it is changing in all aspects of sports, but it's taken a lot of hard, dirty work to stay committed to changing the culture.
Yep. completely agree.
Now I want to flip back to goat tying and calf roping, because I thought I understood the logistics of it. And I'd sit there all week and I'd worked out, okay, you need this, you need that, the first 0 to 10 in a flying 10, that's, you got to be really explosive and absolutely strong to come out of that dirt, come flying down to the goat. And as me and you talked, you're like, yeah, no. You know what I mean?
You're not incorrect. All of those things would benefit.
Right.
For sure. But
what you hit me with really, really took me back. So they're coming down on a horse, flying stop for a goat tire, a calf roper. They're coming off before the rope gets tight. So the horse is still moving forward. So they're actually hitting the ground in an overspeed eccentric. They're actually being catapulted into the sprint. Well, now deacceleration has to come into play, because they've got to get themselves under control, and possibly a change of direction because the goat's staked out. The calf has, it has some room to work down the rope, but it's a little bit more straight line. But yeah, there's a change of direction in there, and then there's an off balance grab to a hip hinge throw. I had not put some of those concepts into mind. So at what point did you guys start delving into the research and say, okay, this is what's happening, as opposed to what you think you see is happening?
Yeah, well, I can't take credit for that, if I'm honest. As much as I would love to, Dr. Andy Wolf, Wolf and Sons Strength and Conditioning out of Tarleton, or around Stephenville, Texas. He's done some work, does work for Tarleton, done some work with the Tarleton Rodeo Team, and he's been a mentor of mine as I've been studying for my CSCS. And so one of the things, I was just picking his brain one day about maybe a goat tying program or whatever. And he's like, and he just threw out there, he's like, everybody thinks that goat tires and calf ropers, they need acceleration. They don't need acceleration. It's deceleration. And I'm like, oh. And so ever since then, I've looked at it that way. And as I watch runs and I start to put this, the first thing we have to do, it's what coaches do without even knowing they're doing it, is they do a needs analysis, right? They do this needs analysis on the sport demands. And so as I watch a goat tying run, I start to look at all those intricate pieces. And when I put those lens on of deceleration, I'm like, slap myself in the face. I'm like, duh. Yeah, of course it is. Because, a goat tire, they're getting off. The horse hasn't stopped. The horse is still running full speed. They're going 30 miles an hour. And they swing one leg over, they hang there on the side for a second, and then they almost like in a curtsy lunge type position, they touch that and they got to go. And they have to be able to lower the center of mass. They have to be able to decelerate. And like you said, if the goat decides to run left or run right, they have to be able to change direction as they're decelerating, and to be able to get themselves into the best position to tie the goat. So for me, like, we have very little at this point in time actual data and numbers about the speeds and what takes place in a goat tying run. I just have to, so far I just look at it as what's actually taking place. They're already moving at high speed. They've got to be able to break it down, and we've got to do that safely. If there's strength coaches listening to this that don't know what goat tying is, and it sounds a little hillbilly, I would agree that it might be, but you'll never see more wrecks and horrible wrecks than you will in the goat tying. You can go YouTube goat tying wrecks. Take 5 minutes of your day and enjoy. You're welcome. Because these girls that can't lower their center of mass, or maybe, they're in an arena, and at this point in time, the arena, sand, dirt, it's had half a rodeo or more on it. So there are holes, it's not turf, it's uneven. And so these girls are coming off at 30 miles an hour. If they can't lower their center of mass, if maybe they step in a hole, they are doing the true, like the definition of a scorpion. Their heels are touching the back of their head and they're sliding for 5 feet on their face in the dirt. And all of it comes down to that ankle stability, that ability to lower your center of mass and decelerate, being able to change direction as need be. Like some of that kind of stuff is, it's huge for them. And as I've started to incorporate that in my training for goat tires, we've got quite a few within our company. I don't work with very many. We've got a couple female coaches that work with Champion Living Fitness that specialize in goat tying. Livy Welchel, she's a graduate of Tarleton through their exercise science program. She's incredibly intelligent and has been a huge resource for us. And she does a great job programming with goat tires and breakaway ropers. But as we've incorporated more deceleration into our programs as opposed to acceleration, we have seen a correlation in faster times and increased performance. Libby just had a girl on a 100-foot score. So the goat is 100 feet away from the starting point. And she ran down on her horse, got off, ran to the goat, flanked it, flipped it on its side, and tied 3 legs together in 5.9 seconds, which is, I mean, 6'5" is probably going to win a lot of college rodeos. And so, I mean, that's like, it's insanely fast. Absolutely. And so anyway, so we've seen a lot of improvement as we've started to approach it with that, preparing them for deceleration, change of direction, as opposed to preparing them for acceleration.
Going back to what I said in the beginning, you know, I know it's opposite now, but you start doing the math on that 100 feet, you're right around 30 meters, a 5'9", 30 in boots, in the dirt, catching a goat, flanking it.
Yep.
You're starting to talk fast.
Yeah, it's insane. And I mean, and none of it's ideal athletic conditions, like you said. I mean, it's, you know, it's sand and dirt, and they're in boots, you know, and so none of it's athletic. And they like, obviously they have their horse, they're riding their horse through, you know, 70 of that 100 feet before they start to dismount, but that horse keeps running and they bail off. But it's moving. And these girls, I mean, it is one of the most competitive events. But goat tying is one of those that it dies after college. So goat tying is in junior rodeo, high school rodeo, college rodeo, but you don't see any goat tying at a professional level, at least from the, you know, like the PRCA, which would be like the NBA or the NFL for rodeo, right? It's not a long future in it. And so that's the other aspect that we see is these girls have to be really, really good really early. And so they start young and they're training, you know, I mean, 12, 13, 14, 15, we better be getting it figured out, because if you're going to go to college as a goat tire on some sort of scholarship, by the time you're 17, you better be elite. Well, it's so early. We're going through so many changes physically, and the demands of the sport are insane. And up until this part, up until recent past, there really hasn't been a lot of strength training that's taken place generally for goat tires. And so we've seen girls having 2 or 3 knee surgeries by the time they're 16. What? You know, I mean, the ACL tears, all that kind of stuff, which women are prone to more anyway, like just the strength and conditioning that can take place that can help these girls from a young age. Man, it can change the game for goat tires in college if we can get them to buy into it.
Yeah, my conjugate mind's running nuts right now, you know, because you're essentially training a football player.
Yeah.
You just have to look at it that way. They're they're like on a punt team. They're running down and they're breaking down and they're making a tackle. That's what they're doing. And like you said, it doesn't go at the pro levels, so they're not chasing it as hard as a professional barrel racer. They have more time. They have classes at school. They have, so now you're in the weight room. So now I'm really going crazy in my mind. You got to get them to do it. That's the whole thing. You got to get them to do it. But you start talking box squats. You start talking sumo pulls. You start talking reverse hypers. You start building how you would build a football player they don't want the size. I get that. They don't want the size. So you have to adjust because there are things that a female athlete wants that is different than what a male wants. But you can help those athletes and not change your program if you're in Texas or whatever. You know, a lot of plyometrics, a lot of that, you know, deacceleration and the depth drops, all that stuff is going to make them better better goat tires and you're going to see faster times and happier athletes.
I completely agree. 100%. A lot of the stuff that you're doing, the fact of the matter is that if we get them from doing nothing except for actually goat tying in practice, and if we incorporate some resistance training, anything is going to help them. You know what I'm saying? Like anything, especially when you're talking building some strength, box squats and sumo pulls, those things, that's all going to make them better. You know, they really, adaptations are so specific, right? And so in order for them, this is what I like, in order for you to be a better bull rider, go ride bulls. If that's what you want to do, if you want to be a better bull rider, go ride bulls. JB Mooney. If you don't know anything about bull riding, you probably have heard the name. And JB is arguably one of the greatest to ever do it. He's won 7 million riding bulls professionally. And he's a cowboy's cowboy, smoking reds, drinking beer. He left the PBR. There's a lot of stories out there, but from my understanding, he left the professional bull riders because he couldn't drink beer in the or couldn't smoke in the locker room anymore. And so like that was the straw that broke the camel's back. He is a cowboy's cowboy, and he's would stand on a medicine ball, would do some stuff. But as far as traditional resistance training goes, none, absolutely none. And the only time he ever tried, he ended up injured. Who knows, why that is. I don't know what he was that he tried, but so he just stayed completely away from it. And so, but I mean, if you look at his stats, the reason he's the greatest to ever do it is because he got on more bulls than anybody else got on. Between practice, at home, and at the rodeos, he was riding bulls day in and day out and day in and day out. If you want to be a better goat tire, go tie goats, right? Like that is specifically how you are going to get better at your sport, is doing your sport. If you want to increase your capacity for your sport, if you want to increase your longevity, and if you want to get 2% better, let's get in the weight room. You know what I'm saying? Like that's going to make you more explosive. We're going to hopefully set you up for success as far as, dare I use the term injury prevention, but, some mitigating some injuries, maybe. And that's where the weight room is going to come into play. But if you want to be good at your sport, at some point in time, you have to go do your sport, and you have to do that more than anything else and more than anybody else. And then you'll rise to the top.
You just have to be able to handle doing that.
That's exactly right. You've got to have the capacity.
Yeah. So you have to weigh that out. Like, I've listened to a lot of interviews with JB and talking about broken neck in the hospital and needed to smoke. So he's hanging out of a window because they said he couldn't go outside. He's a different cat. He is, his diet consists of like Jell-O pudding snacks, and it's not what you would think of as an athlete. And as much as he's won and as great as he's been, what if?
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. So everybody looks at him. Again, that's the cycle, right? Everybody looks at him. He's the greatest to ever do it. And he stood on a medicine ball. I'm standing on a medicine ball, and I'm going to smoke cigarettes, and I'm going to drink beer. And I'm like, cool. JB, number one, has more talent in his pinky finger than you have in your whole body, right? However, he's been gifted to ride bulls. Number two, he has more try and more want to and more grit and more determination than you'll have in 4 lifetimes. He'll go to the practice pen and get on 7 bulls. You go to the practice pen and get on 1. It was good enough to make your girlfriend happy. She thinks you're a cowboy, and you can leave. Like that's not it, man. That's not how you're going to become the greatest to ever do it. You've got to have the grit and the want to and the try, and you've got to have that. And yes, $7 million riding professional bulls, or riding bulls at a professional level, but we'll never know. Could he have been the 14? Could he have been the $14 million man if we would have been to this spot when he was 16, and he would have started with somebody that knew what they were doing and were able to help him from the time he was 16 to the time he was 35? I don't know. I mean, it's conjecture at this point, right? It's just opinion. But I mean, I can't help but think that it would have helped.
So that has me falling back, and I know you got a chance to talk to him. We actually named my youngest daughter after him, but Ty Murray.
Yeah.
At the end of Ty Murray's career, when he's trying to wrap it up, and he's been the all-around cowboy the majority of his life, but now he's starting to sustain injuries, and it's getting harder. He's starting to back off the bulls. starting to, give up maybe saddle bronc here and have to decide when and where he's going to ride and what he's going to ride because the injuries have mounted up. When you talk to him now, the things he learned at the end of his career, would he have put in the beginning for sustainability?
Yeah, I think so. But, I think absolutely he would have. I mean, and how many times, it doesn't matter what you're doing, right? Hindsight's 2020. And you would, if I could go back and change some things that I did in my career, absolutely, things would be different. But I think that he definitely would change some things. But he was doing a lot of stuff inherently without even knowing it. Like, he'd go to the racetrack when he was a kid, and he would get up on the rail and just walk the rail around the racetrack. And his goal was to get around at one time without falling off. Just natural stuff as an adolescent, just learning just some basic principles of balance and coordination. He was in gymnastics, right? He involved himself in being able to manage his body weight and move his body weight and the mobility that comes from those exercises. So inherently he didn't necessarily know that those things are going to make me the greatest all-around champion in the rough stock side of things that the world of professional rodeo will have seen up until 2024, right? Like, he didn't know that those things were going to naturally make him a legend. He just inherently did them. That wasn't the motivation behind it. And so, but I do think that, he had said that, like, he'd injure his knee. And so then he'd come back and he'd rehab his knee, left kind of everything else alone, would crack back out shortly thereafter. Boom, the shoulder's gone. And it took a couple times for him to realize that, yes, while you're making your weakest part strong and you're rehabbing that, you've also got to be working the whole body and that was where he finally, I think, turned a corner in being able to stay healthy, was when he was incorporating resistance training. He spared no expense at the time. He spared no expense on seeking out professionals and rehabilitation and helping him get to the next level. But strength and conditioning just wasn't where it is today in the 90s. And especially not in the world of professional rodeo. It was unheard of. And so, would he change some things? I'm sure that he would. But, he just inherently did a lot of the great qualities at the very beginning.
He was the first cowboy to do conjugate. He just didn't know what conjugate was. Do you have Super Training, the book?
Say that one more time.
Do you have Super Training, the book?
No, I don't. I'll get a copy though.
It's pricey, but man, it's just an incredible book. And I wonder what things lie in there that could be broken down for the rodeo cowboy.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely get my hands on a copy and read. I'm always down to read something that might make me better as a coach. I don't. A lot of the ideology and the principles that I've incorporated really, have come from just the fundamentals and the basics of strength and conditioning is where I've been, right? I've played around with some, a lot of our stuff has been linear periodization, but like that doesn't work for a lot of rodeo athletes, especially when we get in the summertime, because we just don't have those blocks of time in which they can be in the gym for an extended period. And so we've been playing with, some mixed sessions and some other stuff to try to like see how we can better help and fit the biggest bang for our buck as far as resistance training goes, these sessions in the gym. So anyway, I'll definitely get a copy of that and read through it.
And that's why I'm a conjugate guy as opposed to linear, because you can bring up the weak points while maintaining the strong points so that you see, okay, so we had talked off air a little bit about saddle bronc riders.
Yep.
I have a saddle bronc rider that comes in the gym and I'm always working out things. What would help him? What would have him better? Where is he weak? I look at the lower back. That's taken a lot of abuse. You got to look at the glutes. Well, now you need the correct firing pattern because you need them glutes to grab so that the lower back's not taking all that injury. The other thing I see, and it's crossed my mind and I've talked to him about it, and I don't know where I fall, is saddle bronc riders take a bigger eccentric stop than the other rough stock riders.
Yep.
Because when they set those stirrups, it's it's a jam. A bareback rider, they're gonna come in and they're gonna set their heels and they're gonna rake, but they're not. There's nothing stopping them like the stirrup.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I built this K-box machine, and I almost wonder how much the K-box could carry over into saddle bronc. Now it's reverse. It's kind of, you're working the muscles, but it's reverse action of what the saddle bronc rider would do. But you have the hard eccentric stop when the K-box, when you're stopping that flywheel, and then you got an explosion out. 8 seconds on a K-box will wear you smooth out.
Oh, I bet it will. Yeah, I bet.
But what you're increasing, I wonder if it would help.
Yeah, I'm sure that it would. That's another thing. The K-box is another thing that, like, until you brought it up the other day in conversation, completely unfamiliar with, right? And so I went to your Instagram and I watched a couple of videos and did a little bit of research, and I definitely think that it's something that would be beneficial for all rodeo events, but definitely you're right for saddle bronc riding. I mean, there's so the movement pattern, the demands of the sport in the bucking horse riding is absolutely counterintuitive. You are working so many different things together in ways in which they never get used together. And so anyway, we can get outside the box a little bit to be able to increase their strength or their power is good. But so many guys want to try to recreate the arena in the gym. And that's not it, right? Like, if you want to be a better bull rider, like I said, go ride bulls. You're balancing on a med ball or, doing your bull moves on some sort of exercise ball. Like, looks cool and it looks great on Instagram and it gets lots of likes. But all it means is that you're really good at balancing on a medicine ball. Like, it doesn't necessarily translate to the arena. So we're not trying to recreate the arena. We're trying to do what you're saying, right? Like, we're just trying to take the demands of the sport, break that down into those little pieces that might make them 1% better, and then incorporate those pieces in their training sessions.
I've also ran this through and have it in my notes, but it seems to me like one arm heavy carries would be an essential part of the sport because the obliques and what the obliques are doing. And then you've got one hand either in a rope on a rein or in a bareback rigging. Yep. So you've put yourself in a vulnerable spot. One hand's doing a tremendous amount of work. The other side of your body is in a stabilization period to keep you from getting broke in half.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the carries are there's something that I incorporate. I mean, we have some variation of locomotion every week, in a program with an athlete, whether it's just a regular, like, really heavy farmer's carry or a suitcase carry of some kind. But heavy, right? And that's the biggest hurdle that we have is getting guys to go heavy and not heavy enough to where they're, obviously you don't want to be compensating, right? I want them to stand up tall and I want them to be able to keep their feet, somewhat on railroad tracks. They're not trying to walk a tightrope as they're doing that carry. They're able to brace and stay nice and tight. And we're thinking about working that entire trunk. And so important because the biggest keyword that will raise the eyebrows of a rodeo athlete is core. All you got to do is say core training and they're in. And because they think that they need a strong core, AKA they want a six pack. And they don't realize that the core is so much more than just what's visible, right? I mean, from all around 360 degrees of that spine, that whole trunk is extremely important in producing rotation when need to, avoiding rotation, and really being able to match the demands of their sport. So I say all that to say that a heavy single arm carry is a great way to incorporate some of that, like, anti-rotation movement, and something that we use on a regular basis for sure.
Before we run out of time, I do want to hit on this because this is the part I struggled with as a rodeo cowboy when I was young. The sport is mentally demanding. It's not everybody is built to handle it mentally because it's your mind will play tricks with you all week about the dangers. You get a high after you get off the horse, but then the whole process starts back over. And if you're not able to overcome that, that's where you see the other things creep in that make you able to handle that.
That's exactly right.
Helping athletes that are doing a sport that is so high risk handle it day in and day out. What protocol? I mean, yes, it's not strength training, but it is training. I mean, you see these athletes before they do something really dangerous, they'll go to a sports psychologist and they'll get their mind right.
Yep.
What is there for rodeo athletes that they can handle that?
Yeah, we're getting more and more. There's a few sports psychologists that are specifically working with rodeo athletes out there. I think of Paige Lawrence, who her husband is Richmond champion. He's been to the NFR umpteen times as a bareback rider. And she was a Olympic figure skater. So she's had some high pressure, very, very competitive nature. And a background, and she's able to, I worked with her a little bit at the tail end of my career, and she was able to do some amazing things for me, mentally. Bree Coker's another one. So we're starting to get some of these, performance coaches, these sports psychologists that are getting inside the world of rodeo and able to help athletes. But really, for me, and that's where I'm going to refer them, if they really have a lot of questions about the mindset, I've become increasingly aware of the importance of me staying within my scope of practice and not trying to be the one-stop shop and end up just being mediocre at a lot of things. And so I will refer them. But if they're coming to me with some basic, their basic questions, or they just want some advice, I refer a lot. We draw on our own experiences, right? And so it's not fact. It's really our opinion based on the experiences that we've had. And the mental game within rodeo is one of the, if not the largest. I mean, we think of it in three pieces. You have the mental game, the physical, and then the skill. The largest pieces are the skill and the mental. The physical plays the smallest role. It does have a role, and it is important. But if you don't have all three, you're not going to make it to the top tier. And if you do, you're not going to stay there very long. And that mental aspect it has a couple different fronts. There's the most obvious in that they're riding a bull or a bucking horse, or they're getting off a horse at 30 miles an hour. And there's this fear of the unknown. There's inherent risk and danger that we are putting ourselves in the way of, and we don't know what's going to happen in 10 seconds. When I nod my head, I could be headed to the hospital. This could be the last time I ever ride. We've had multiple athletes die in the arena. This is a thing. We've had multiple. We had one in 2024, tragedy. Trenton Montero, professional bareback rider, that died in the hospital after injuries that he sustained at a rodeo. I mean, it's a thing. So there's that mental aspect of the courage that it takes to, do something no matter how dangerous it is, because you love it and it's what you want to do, right? So there's that aspect. But then once we get past that, once you get to the professional level, a lot of the guys have managed that. The anxiety that comes with, that kind of stuff. Now we start to move into this like performance anxiety, and the anxiety around proving yourself, and the idea around like, do I belong at an elite level? Do I not belong at an elite level? And part of that is the fact that rodeo athletes are independent contractors and they're competing on a daily basis. So we're typically not selected to a team. We choose where we go. And when we get there, we're competing against 15, 20, 30, 40 other guys for the prize money, and only those that perform the best and draw the best win any prize money. And so you have to have that mental fortitude to go out and understand that not every single ride is going to be good, right? And we put so much weight on every time we get on a bucking horse or a bull, and it becomes this make or break moment. And those that are very successful, what we found, and this is not coming from a scientific standpoint in any way, shape, or form, but what I have found the correlation that I see is the guys that are able to be at the top level in professional rodeo, they are self-confidence millionaires. They can make a withdrawal on Thursday and be 68 points. It happens to the best in the world too. They can make a mistake and they stub their toe and they're 68 points. You know what happens on Friday? They're 3 states away. They drove 12 hours and they're 88 points. They're able to, that withdrawal they made from their self-confidence on Thursday, it didn't bankrupt them. They're still millionaires, and they still know that they belong there, and that they have the mental fortitude and that mental toughness to be able to let yesterday slip by and to be able to focus on what's important today. They never let the highs get too high or the lows get too low. They're able to stay level, and that's why they see success over the long term. So the mental game is such a big part of it, because it's not just the danger. It's the grind day in and day out. It is not what people think it is out there. It is hard out there. I mean, mentally, being away from your family, spending all your money. Guys are running up credit cards to get to the next rodeo. They're doing all the things. And by August, all they want to do is go home. A lot of them are like, man, I'm ready for a break. I just want to go to the house. And the fact that nobody cares what you did yesterday. I can remember I'd go Ogden, Utah one time. I was 88 points and I was like, man, I'm doing it. Like, this is awesome. And the next day I was like 68 points. And I was like, I've forgotten all of my training. What is going on here? And I finally was able to get to a spot and I started to see more success in my career when I laid my head down on the pillow in the camper at night. That was it. I could enjoy the evening after I rode, like live it up, be happy, be thankful. The next morning when you wake up, you got to go back to war. Nobody cares. The bucking horse you've drawn tonight certainly doesn't care what you did last night. Your friends don't care. Your mom doesn't care. Nobody cares. It doesn't matter. You got to go do it again today. You've got to go get ready to go to war and have that mindset that yesterday doesn't matter. Today is all there is. I got to go back to it, and that's the hardest thing. At least it was for me, to get to that mental state where, man, you got to go to war every day. And after retiring, like, that's the thing. That's the reason why so many guys are like, man, don't you miss it? I'm like, no. And number one, I'm still involved in the industry. I don't miss the anxiety, the performance anxiety that I faced every single day because I didn't understand who I was in my place. And rodeo was who I was. It wasn't just what I did. It was who I was. My identity was on the wrong thing. And so every day I felt like I had to prove myself to my peers and to those around me and I didn't realize any of that until after I quit, right? I didn't know any of this until afterwards, but I was always trying to prove myself to myself and to others. And my identity was it was wrapped up in the wrong stuff. And anyway, so the mental game it's huge for rodeo athletes of all levels.
Man, this has been a great conversation. It's one I've been wanting to do for a long time. I just couldn't find the person to have it with. Yeah. So I appreciate you taking time early on a Saturday morning to sit down and talk about all things rodeo. I know this isn't your average sport that gets discussed on here, but hopefully there's some takeaways that coaches can either help their rodeo athletes or have a better idea of the sport and how closely it can tie to the sport that they are working with.
Absolutely. That's the goal. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to be able to be here and discuss and just the relationship that has come even just this week with you and the future. I'm really excited for the conversations that are coming. If there are strength coaches that are all over the country that are listening that have great ideas, I would love to hear them. Like, I want to grow. I'm hungry to get better. And so none of what I've said today comes from a position of I've got it figured out. This has been my experience and my opinion and what I've seen so far. And I'm ready to be wrong. So I'm equipped and can handle it. And I would love to hear other people's opinions, strength coaches' opinions and ideas behind training. And that's how we get better is we have to continue to level up our belief system. And the only way that happens is by being able to say, I was wrong. And I'm willing to, we got to grow, man. We got to grow.
Well, Coach, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe we can do this again.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a blast.